Welcome to Blog Talk Radio, listeners and all the other listeners out there. Here we are on our Hangout on Air. This is a real point of view, and we're talking movies. And today's subject is today's graphic novels. Previously, we were talking on Blog Talk Radio this evening about all the different films that are out there that are not necessarily the superhero films, but other films of note that have got their start as graphic novels. And joining me tonight is another film critic, Mr. Larry Domkowski of Must See Movies on the Internet. And he and I have been discussing this on Blog Talk Radio earlier. And one of the cool things about these graphic novels, Larry, is that they start off as these wonderful stories, and as you alluded to in our earlier conversation, storyboards that are basically part of our comic book history, and getting even more in depth with a novel, and now taking that novel and putting it on film. As a genre of film, we love films, and as a genre of comic books, we love comic books. So to me, this is a perfect marriage of two things that I love. What's your idea and what's your opinion about it, Larry?
Well, I'm in the same thing as you here. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of visual entertainment, and since graphic novels, graphic novels specifically, are visual narrative. A good comic book can tell the story. It can relate the story without really doing any words at all. Take a look at how the story progresses, how each scene changes. Certain comic book writers, artists really understand this, and I'm going to go to Frank Miller with what he did at the Daredevil series in the early 80s, and then what he did with the Batman in the Dark Knight, how he used frame. A frame not only gives us a passage of time, but a frame from one frame to the other can be seconds, be minutes, be days. And he understood this, and he used this, and sometimes frames blended together, and sometimes the whole page was one picture but cut up into 10 frames. Right. And so we're seeing just fractions of a second, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And we see time almost standing still as somebody gets, something happens to them. And at the same time, in other cases, things happening so rapidly back and forth that we're not sure where we stand in the whole cosmic entity that is this graphic novel. When films like Watchmen came out and tried to remain as true as they could to the graphic novel, we saw a lot of that. We saw a lot of how some of these graphic novels, some of these films, played with that essence of time. Is it being stretched, or is it being compressed? And we see that and we feel that, and it's very visceral in the films. In places like 300, great film to show how things compress or expand. Something that takes only a split second, but it's like takes so long for something to complete. And yet at the same time, sometimes things are happening so fast around, we're not sure where we are. And the filmmakers of 300 really got that. They really understood that. Same thing with Sin City. There are times where it pulls it or compresses it, and again, we're just transfixed on the screen. And one of the things about all of these is that because they come from a visual medium, they're very stylized when they come to the film.
Right.
They keep that stylization because that's a part of the world that the story is has been incubated, and we take that and we move it from these pages to the film, but we don't lose that stylization. And where is that real important? It really worked in The Crow. You remember that movie, The Crow?
Sure. Brandon Lee as Bruce Lee's son was in the original film.
Yeah, tragic for him, right, unfortunately. But the film, again, so heavily stylized, the comic so heavily stylized. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about the film, was that they tried to remain true to the style that the graphic novel was using to tell the story.
I want to go back a few moments about the expand and contract. And I think that is really prevalent in another graphic novel that came to the film, which is in Wanted, starring Angelina Jolie. That was a wonderful film using that medium that you referred to of expanding and contracting throughout that film, which gave it a lot of nuance and really helped fill the film itself and made it a little bit more broad and a little bit more substance to the film. That technique, anyway. I remember seeing that in that particular film. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. But, it's funny. As a kid, being involved in a lot of trading of comic books, being collecting, being a collector, passing that collecting down to my younger brother and so forth. I think it's really a wonderful thing to be able to see these graphic novels come to life from not just the pages of the graphic novel, but also cerebrally from the visions of my own mind and probably the mind of other people who were big into comic books, trying to see the world and view the world differently through the context of the comic book, and now seeing a lot of those visions coming true on film is even that much more exciting to me. So was this an exciting transition for you as well?
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. Although the film that you mentioned, the Wanted, it lacks. There's not a problem in the film as much as in the original story. It lacked a certain it lacked that edge that a lot of these comic books, a lot of these graphic novels relied on. And yet at the same time, when it looked to me as though somebody had an idea for a film and they just, or a story to make into a graphic novel, and it was sold into being made into a film before the graphic novel was ever completed. And so I see a lot of that. I see a lot of jumping the gun with certain things, and rather than making sure that they're telling a story first. Mm-hmm. Another one I'd like to bring up here is, and it's something that you and I have talked about in the past before in a different thing, but it came right out of graphic novels, was Blade.
Oh yeah.
and I mean, what a fun series! And Wesley Snipes does a great job. The director, the director of the first one, Norrington, does a pretty good job. But I like the second one better because Del Toro directs it, and I like what he does, and he really adds a better horror element to the whole thing. I don't know about you, but I enjoy the second one better than I like the first one.
I like the first one because it introduces you to the character and starts the development. But the second one is a lot more fun, and I too enjoyed the trilogy. But the first two movies are the better of the three, and the second one is the better one. But I only think it's just a little bit better than the first. But yet, I enjoyed the second one too. I like the fact that now the hunters are the hunted, and there's a new type of threat that is a threat not only to the vampires but also to the vampire hunters. So they have to form an allegiance in order to see if what they can do to try to stop this new threat that's out there. And I thought that was very cool. But I'm a martial arts guy. I'm a big Bruce Lee fan, as you well know. But Wesley Snipes is a very formidable martial artist in film, especially. And
like a Bulletproof Monk, because that came from the page.
That's another graphic novel, Bulletproof Monk. That I liked it. And again, certain actors that I really like. Chow Yun-fat is a very good actor to me, and to see him in a whimsical role was just very refreshing. And I actually liked that movie a lot. A lot of people, it wasn't one of those movies that had a lot of hype, and it wasn't, out there as far as publicity is concerned. But those of you who have found the Bulletproof Monk, like Larry and I have, you will agree with us. And then those who haven't found it, go out and see this movie. The Bulletproof Monk it's a hoot, and it's really a fun film to watch. And those of you whether you're a Wesley Snipes fan or not, Blade, the trilogy, is worth it, especially the first two films. The third film, it was okay.
It's okay. It's like, we have to do one more.
It's okay, and I guess they want to give it closure, but it never really gave it true closure. But definitely watch the first two films. The first two films are excellent, and if you like action and a decent storyline, the first.
There are a lot of these that are based on like vampire films, and there's this one series. It really wasn't a graphic novel originally. It became one. It was a 3-issue miniseries, and it was called 30 Days of Night.
Right. Yeah.
And again, I mean, this is pretty serious stuff. Very mixed reviews as far as the film is concerned. The comic is very graphic, very. It's
movie's kind of graphic,
and the movie does not fail as far as that part of the film. That's true. And it's not for the faint of heart. Let me just say that it's not.
No. If you've got high blood pressure, make sure you take your medicine before.
Yeah. Now it's different as far as the graphic content is vampire and slasher and almost Saw-esque. Whereas in the graphic content from Watchmen is horrifying.
Yeah.
It's horrifying. Again, I wouldn't rate that for kids. And there's this scene in there in the book where Rorschach, one of the heroes, and probably the only one who's truly heroic out of everyone in that film and the story, is chasing down a child killer.
Right.
And he's trying to find a girl. And what he finds are dogs chewing on the bone of a child. And it is so horrific. And how this is shown to us makes our stomach turn. There's nothing in horror movies that is more horrifying than what those few scenes in that book give us. And when Rorschach brings this person to justice, he does it in the only way possible, in a very visceral, very personal way, and has nothing to do with justice, but everything to do with crying out for vengeance. Mm-hmm. And because by the time that story comes to us, we're no longer thinking in terms of justice. And that's one of the problems. That's just problems in the world that the Watchman that Watchman is told is that there's no longer anything called justice. It's all vengeance. It's all it's all fist and blood, and it gives no one the ability to come clean. Nobody's clean. Not even in a way the little girl, because now she represents the last thing that was pure in that world.
Probably in any world.
Well, did you read and then after reading it, see Sin City?
I didn't actually read Sin City. Actually, my first introduction to Sin City was the film, and it wasn't until after I'd seen the film. Watching the film, it just obviously reminds you of a graphic novel, just in the way that it's presented, as you alluded to in our first on our Blog Talk Radio broadcast, that it shows pretty much like different frames, and just like a comic book does, and that styling. And I haven't actually read Sin City at all, but I have enjoyed the films.
Yeah, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about Road to Perdition?
Well,
it was 2 weeks ago we talked about Road to Perdition, and I had mentioned back then that it's very indicative to the Japanese noir. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that the book that it's from is based on the Japanese series Lone Wolf and Cub.
Keep going, Larry. You got me.
Yeah, it's based upon based on the Lone Wolf and Cub series. Now, some people who are martial arts people know the movie Lone Wolf and Cub and have seen it, which is brilliant. But again, that was based on this manga series, Lone Wolf and Cub, a graphic comic series, Lone Wolf and Cub. There are several films that are based off of Lone Wolf and Cub. One of them was actually a French novel first, and then becomes a motion picture, and that is one of my favorite movies of all time, a French film called Diva, and I've shared that film with you, Greg.
Mm-hmm. It's a good movie.
It is,
and it's one of those movies that pretty much takes you on a ride, literally, both in cars and on a motorcycle and on a bicycle.
Yeah, and it's surprising. It's surprisingly good. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because sometimes some films are second generation away from the original graphic novel, like this one is. It's about the Lone Wolf and Cub. There's a hero of the story is this French mercenary who, after doing what he had to do in Vietnam, ends up having one survivor, and it's an infant girl. and so he quits. He quits doing what he's doing and realizes that he now has to watch out. He has to take care of this girl. And there's a series of 3 novels, and one of them, Eva, is about how these two end up, helping and saving a mail courier, a teenager who happens to be a messenger, a courier. I'm not going to tell you anything more about this. It's worthwhile seeing.
It is. It's a good movie.
Yeah. Back to the graphic novels, though. We had mentioned Akira earlier. This is something more. It's more. It's it's true animation, hand-drawn animation, hand-painted animation, and it's worth seeing. I will say this 1,000 times. I was introduced to this film by a couple of animators who were traditional animators, and when I saw this, I was just overwhelmed. One of the things that is important that without Akira, we wouldn't have had The Matrix, because the people who made The Matrix were that strongly influenced from the book and the movie Akira. So this is important. This is actually not just a good film and good animation, but this is important for the future of film and where film can take us, and as far as giving us a story that really tells us something of ourselves that we didn't necessarily want to see. A film that does that too, we mentioned a moment ago, was Watchmen. Again, it takes us to a place that we don't necessarily want to see, but we have to.
I guess just like anything, the graphic novels, the stories that are being told, stories that are being expressed on the page as well as in film, we have to take into consideration that much of the subject matter deals with how our lives are, whether they be the actual occurrences that are happening around us, whether they be metaphors of those things that are happening around us. We have to know it's based on how our lives are, how life is, and or how life could be, how life can be, how life may be if we change certain things. So it's always a part of our lives that is put into context at some point in any of these graphic novels, any literature that we read, any films that we watch. There is realism somewhere within the realms of it, and how our lives are affected, and how the messages that are trying to be put across in front of us about how our lives have been, how we live our lives, and what is going to influence the future.
Sure.
I just am taken aback by the fact that when we were children, how our parents would always say those comic books, those, why don't you pick up a real book and read it? Well, these are real books. This is real literature. This is real information. It's really important content. It is elevated as a parent in film, elevated to a different level than what our parents thought we were wasting time on in the past.
Well, yeah, and remember, the comic books that our parents had was very different than what was happening, what started in the late 70s and early 80s. It was very different.
It was.
And what was happening, interestingly enough, what was happening in the late 70s and early 80s was a result of underground comic books. It was the result of things that didn't subscribe to the comic book code, and so it had a little bit more freedom to be more in your face. That's a good way of putting it.
But it's just like the times too. There was a big transition in the times as well, back in the 60s and the 70s. To me, that's where a lot of changes took place, and no different than the underground.
Yeah, you had a lot of important elements in that era, specifically dealing with two things that happened in this country. One of them was the Vietnam War.
Yep.
Totally changed what happened in comics. Two, the civil rights movement. Again, powerful in what it did with popular literature, not just comics. So, where in one hand, DC Comics, in many ways, they tried to ignore some of the issues, some of the things that were going on in the country, but in ways they mentioned it. Batman closes up the Batcave. You know, and after that, then he tried to go back to the way he used to do things before he got all gizmoed out. On the other hand, Marvel did some things that were just incredible. Marvel was the first comic book that put an African American in a story that wasn't not just the hero, but actually was someone that a hero talked to. And that was a big deal. And I forgot which issue of Spider-Man it is, but Peter Parker, as Spider-Man, talks to a student who is African American. And what's interesting is that moment in comic book changed comic books. Because prior to that, unless it was about an African American hero, that never happened. There was a separation between the comic book hero and anything that was non-white. That book changed it. Spider-Man changed it. And for that reason, that's why I like Spider-Man for, since that moment on. Because it was showing us, not this utopian falsehood, but it was saying, hey, we're all real people. We all live and breathe. We go to the same stores. We walk on the same streets. Why can't we talk to each other? And they put it in our faces, and they kept it there, right in our faces the whole time. They were far more giving us some real social issues to accept, deal with, and to move on. Far more than DC. It took DC another good 10, 15 years before they got to that point. They did do some things, but not enough, and it took them a while.
Yeah, I guess I've always been, as a child, I think I pretty equally liked both Marvel and DC, but I think as I got to be a little bit older, I gravitated toward Marvel, excuse me, a little bit more. I think they were edgier anyway. And at a time when you want transition, when you want change, when you want to be a little bit more assertive, Marvel did that for me. And I've been a Marvel fan ever since. Look at the early 60s was, it was more mid to late 60s for us, and early 70s, before I really got into the realms of comic books, but had been a collector for many years. and was fortunately able to pass that on to my brother. But getting into more of the graphic novels like Batman the Detective kind of brought me back a little bit into the fold for DC. I think Batman, being a dark character, being the hero that was the hero that didn't have superhuman strength but had was very capable with his knowledge and his just mental capabilities. Kind of brought me back, and a little bit more development of the character through those graphic novels. I wanted to go jumping back into the more futuristic and more recent films that have a graphic novel attached to it. We were talking about vampire films a little bit ago, and a series of vampire films that have a graphic novel, and I don't know if they actually started off that way, but have a graphic novel that I really enjoy is, excuse me, the Underworld movies.
Mm-hmm.
And having a good characterization by a really good actress in Kate Blanchett, playing the star of the film of the trilogy. Really enjoyable. Really liked the battle between the vampires and the werewolves, or as they are referred to in the film, lycans. Really kind of that dark, kind of cartoon comic book feel to it, along with a kind of edginess that I really enjoy. And I thought those were really good films. Did you have a chance to see those, Larry? Did you like them?
Oh yeah, I did, and I think uh, one of the things I want to say about it before before I say anything else is these films were meant to be just fun.
Right.
They're not meant to be important. I am a big fan of what's his name, Bill Nighy, who plays the old vampire.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of him. I like him in everything he's ever done, whether if it was quirky or a little bit left of center or you name it. And he does a great job. What the character's name is Victor, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I enjoy it. I enjoy what he does. It's not necessarily something that you're going to just say, "Gee, what do I want to watch tonight?" You got to be in the mood for it.
Sure.
You got to be in the mood for vampires, and werewolves, the lycans, going at each other. I understand what the author was doing originally with it and where he was taking it. And unfortunately, we missed that. We missed the point because of how the story is told. But that being said, forget about what the original point was for the story. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And I guarantee that you will find something redeeming about it, and then you feel guilty because you thought something was redeeming about it. It's a guilty pleasure movie.
It is a guilty pleasure series, but so is Blade for me. I think, I go way back with the vampires to off topic here, but way back to the vampires with Dark Shadows, Barnabas Collins, and the Collins family, bringing me up into the future, and I just like the new kind of vampires that are out there, if I must say so. I'm not a big horror movie fan. because I think a lot of the horror movies, in my opinion, are a little gooey. And what I mean by gooey is, I don't know, a lot of zombies, a lot of creatures. But it seems to me those creatures that scare me more are the ones that seem to be more lifelike, more seem, in my opinion, to be have possibilities of realism. Vampires are, they look like us, they talk like us, they just can't stay out in the sun like us. And if you're not paying attention, you won't know that you're even talking to a vampire. And a werewolf, it's the same thing. They look like us, talk like us, but if there's a full moon, you might not survive the night. Those are the kind of quirky kind of films. The Creature of the Black Lagoon never scared me because I'm just, you see him coming and you're going to get away from that guy. And you're going to run away because he's coming out of the, kind of this launchy kind of thing. Frankenstein the same way, this kind of launchy thing. You're not catching me. You're not catching me, man.
Yeah, well.
The vampire could be standing next to you, hugging you, drinking a beer, and the next thing you know, you're bit.
Yeah, and your world has changed.
Exactly. Your world has changed tonight.
Well, and maybe one of these days we should just do vampire films and how vampires have changed in film, because they really have changed a lot. We've done it before, but we could do more with that.
We've touched on it before, but that's because we find that some of our favorite films have been these movies over time. But we could do that. We can do that.
Yeah. The back to the graphic novel thing. There are more coming out. And you don't have to go too far. You can go to IMDb, and you can go to a couple of other movie sites and look for movies in production.
Yeah,
and that's important. Films in production, movies in production, and you will get a list of all of these films and hundreds of films. Most of them we will never see. But
right.
It's true. But and it'll tell you, are these films under development? Are they casting? Are they shooting? Are they in post-production? Do they have a release date set? I'll tell you these things. What's cool is if it's in development, it means one thing and one thing only. They're looking for money. And that's exactly what that means. They are looking for money, because as money gets involved in the film industry, so does the script. Somebody will say, I can give you so many dollars if you're willing to do this. And they'll say yes or no. And a great example of a film that was went through a whole lot in development was Star Wars. And then a return of the and then all three of the original films, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. And it got to the point where Lucas just didn't want anybody else's money and couldn't get anybody else's money, so he used his own. And he left all the way to the bank.
Yeah, indeed.
Because all these people thought, well, I give you money, but this is what I want you to do. And he said, no, that's not my story. I mean, that's the light version of that. But the point is, money is a huge part of the film industry and what is happening. There's a couple of films. There's a lot of films out there that don't let money get in the way, either because the film doesn't take much to make, or it takes more money than anybody's got. And so we've got films that feel like they came from comic books but didn't, like Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
And Cameron just has he had enough money to do what he wanted to do and did it. And there you go. On the other hand, you have films that took hardly any money to do it all, and you get Blair Witch Project. If you don't let money influence what you're doing, then you're going to be more free to tell the story you want to tell. You may not have all the bells and whistles, but the important thing is you're telling a good story. And if you can tell a good story, then you can make a mediocre script into a great story. You can take a mediocre film and it's actually just a great story. And you've seen it, you've all seen that. You've all seen when this movie is just a really good movie, but you can't really put your finger on it. But you find that you're just locked into that film. It's telling you a good story, and it's telling it well. And it takes a lot to do that.
Yeah, and we find that a lot of the graphic novels, some of the ones we mentioned today on our after show here on A Real Point of View, or in our early show on Blog Talk Radio, graphic novels have played a really big role in not just good writing and good literature, but in eventually good film. And that's important to take its place along other genres, really. The graphic novel is important to film.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, I don't know about you, but we're winding down here. So any final words about graphic novels? Anything coming up that you've pinpointed yourself, since you alluded to these movies that are in production? Anything out there that you're looking forward to seeing?
Well, there are a lot of things that I'm looking forward to seeing. Right now, my brain cannot get beyond the end of this year when the next Star Wars movie comes out. Though not taken from a graphic novel, it's there's so much content out there that a lot of people are going to be upset because they're not going to be able to use some of that content. Point blank, they're not using some of that content. And like, for instance, they're not using Admiral Thrawn, Grand Admiral Thrawn from the novels. He doesn't even exist in the film world, and won't. But they are using some things from the film world. From the novel world. And it looks like they're going to be totally rewriting Han Solo's back history. So his backstory. So that will be interesting to see what they do and how they do that. I'm looking forward to that. Other than that, I think that I've got about 20 movies that I'd like to see, but right now I'm still thinking in terms of that thing. How about yourself?
I'm looking forward to Star Wars also. I'm looking forward to the next Avenger movie and the Civil War. And I'm also looking forward to two other films, the X-Men's Apocalypse, and I'm looking forward to seeing Mr. Holmes.
Oh, yeah.
About Sherlock Holmes. So, I'm looking forward to those films. I want to go back and look at a lot of films that have come out in 2015 that I wasn't able to see and that we haven't reviewed yet, to see what else is out there. That in itself will be fun for me, I think.
Real quick, I just to let you know that they are remaking the movie Akira, and I will see it, but it's I don't know. I think what they're going to try to do is try to make it live action, and
wow, that's going to be rough.
With computer animation, they can do that now. And so it's going to be entirely different than the animated feature from the 80s. We'll see. We'll see about that.
Well, I have that film, So you'll be proud of me. I have that film, and I enjoyed it both times that I've seen it, because it's intense. It is an intense film. Well, thanks, Larry, for hanging out with us here, and I appreciate you as always. And next week, ladies and gentlemen, we haven't figured out what we're going to do next week, but that's okay. But come back and listen to our conversation on Blog Talk Radio at 11, and our YouTube / Google Plus / Hangout on Air here on the A Real Point of View channel. For all of us here on A Real Point of View, we'd like to say farewell, and make sure that you're watching the movies, people. It's a wonderful ride. Take care, Larry.
Hey, peace.
Peace. Night, everybody.